Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I am your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Kevin Dolan, who's the founding member of the Exit Group, which is a paternal or fraternal order for professional men who are seeking connection in the teetering late stage empire of the United States of America. He's also an author, and he penned this Substack article about the scaling of civilization from the tribe all the way up to this current incredibly technocratic society. And I found his framing of how we conceptualize government from those small groups to this faceless kind of blob to be very fascinating and telling with regards to how to conceptualize the state and the time that we are in. You can find links to his work down there in the description. And if you enjoy this content, consider liking, subscribing, and donating via the links below. Without further ado, here is Kevin Dolan. What have you been up to this holiday season?
Oh man, we racked up Christmas. I got my kids those little so I have six kids. And our
Wait,
big
what?
present was I have six kids. And
What's the
we
age
we
range?
it's what, 10 to basically 2 years apart all the way down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Oh
Sorry to
yeah, thanks.
interrupt you.
Well, we got these little go-karts. They're not really go-karts. They're like little bumper cars. They're like maybe the size of a skateboard but twice as wide.
Okay.
And the top speed is like 8 miles an hour, so they kind of have this like Mario Kart experience around the cul-de-sac. So that was pretty fun.
Oh,
Anyway,
wow. Do you get some time off from work, or is it kind of like a working vacation for you?
well, this is my exit's my business, so I basically do it when I do it.
Yeah.
Took a handful of days off, but mostly getting ready for Coronation Ball, getting ready for NatalCon. A lot
Yeah.
going on.
What's Coronation Ball?
Well, so basically, as I understand it, that's going to be like the big right-wing inaugural party. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
uh,
Storming capitals, you know,
yeah,
lynching people left and right.
yeah. I'll send it to you. It's
Are you close by the seat of American imperial power?
No, no. Although I
Okay.
was, I actually just moved from Culpeper, Virginia, to Austin. So
Okay. Fun.
yeah,
Wow. Cool. Passage. Lomez is just amazing.
yeah, it's tremendous.
Yeah. So, your write-up. Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
What do I call you? Because I don't know how to pronounce
Uh,
phylacteries. Phylacteries?
Phylactery.
Phylactery.
Yeah, you can call me Kevin. It's fine.
Because you have a lot of files. Or
Yeah,
vials. Yeah?
something like
Kevin.
that.
Yeah.
No, Kevin's fine.
Okay. And why did you pick this online moniker? What's the
Well, the
lore?
thing to do in like 2015, 2016 was to pick like a historical figure, black and white, as your Abby. And I wanted to pick somebody from Latter-day Saint church history, but I didn't want it to be somebody that like I respected because I didn't want to like put my bad takes in a good person's mouth. So I picked the Judas of the Latter-day Saint movement. He's this like he betrayed the cause and got a bunch of people killed and
Oh,
he and so basically my avatar is he's a demi-lich now, which if you ever play Dungeons and Dragons, a demi-lich is like an undead sorcerer who all that's left is his skull. And so it's this guy, he's an undead sorcerer, he tweets from hell. That was
okay.
the original conceit of the account.
Wait, is he an or a demi-lich in LDS lore? Because they do have like this cosmology. I'm sure there's a
No.
hell. Okay.
No, no. We take the view that a lot of Christians take, which is it's not up to us to judge where everybody ends up.
Okay.
But, definitely in historical terms, a bad guy.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, historically. Yeah. From outside.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what is exit? What is the purpose of that? And is it an acronym?
No, it's not an acronym. It's from the concept of voice versus exit. You're familiar with that? The idea that you can exercise voice within a system, or you can leave. And
Yeah.
and basically, our our idea was that those are not actually mutually exclusive. They're not opposites. You actually need the power to exit to credibly exercise voice. And so the idea of building leverage against all these institutions that are, hostile to people like us, making it so that when we say no, it matters, it counts for something. Um, I mean, it started in the midst of the vax mandates and the the doxing, all the Antifa doxing. I mean, I got doxed. That's how it got started. Basically, was I got doxed, and a bunch of guys reached out to me, and they were like, "Hey, can I introduce you to somebody who might have a job, et cetera, et cetera." And I was like, I of all the opportunities that were sort of presented to me during the doxing, I could only maybe take advantage of like one or two. But I thought if we got all these people together, talking to each other, building things, connecting, then lots of people could help each other, and we could build something that really meaningfully moved the needle. And so
Yeah.
I just sort of put that out, that idea out. It had no structure. But in the first 2 weeks, I had 75 guys sign up. And so I was like, all right, I'm on to something here. And it's evolved to be, we sort of thought carefully over time about like, why do we actually care about this? Like, why is it so important that we be able to push back against these systems? What's wrong with these systems? And realize that essentially the answer is that they're sterilizing. They're sterilizing us. They're sterilizing our kids. They're making it harder to get educated and employed and raise and married and raising families. And basically just like interrupting the life cycle of human beings. Just like, you can mess with a Siberian tiger or a panda, and then it won't breed. And we mean that both in terms of like just biologically, can you have kids? Can you raise a family? But also in terms of your culture, like is your culture iterating, or is it getting eaten by this universal solvent of modernity?
Okay.
And so Exit is basically a group of guys trying not to do that.
Yeah. So there's this discourse that kind of evolved over time, where we had Jordan Peterson and the IDW, broadly speaking, kind of coming out against what would be called wokeness, and a lot of their intellectual critiques were against postmodernism. So it was assumed that modernism, liberal democracy, was the pinnacle, or the best system that we could have. And then kind of parallel to that was another discourse that is kind of gaining a lot of traction now, because the critics of postmodernism and wokeness just wanted to revert basically to 1990, basically more or less 1990 with an iPhone. They want 1990 with an iPhone, probably. But then there's the dissident right, aimed their criticism against modernity itself, not postmodernism, but modernism. And I tend to think, I think that they call themselves post-liberals, basically.
Yeah.
And now there's kind of like this, now there's this discourse, because woke has kind of spent itself out. I know it's still embedded in the institutions. Maybe I could ask you what you think about that, just how far woke is over, or that particular iteration of the liberal, hyper-liberal project, progressivism, is over. But it seems like we have a little bit of respite because of the elections and because people are getting more and more agitated against it. So now the liberals are targeting the post-liberals on their right, and warning against, I guess they're using the same critique as the woke did. You guys are fascist, you're ethnocentric, and that's not the way to go. That there be dragons, or there lie, death and destruction.
Right.
So that's kind of like the field right now. And you emerge, where were you, or where are you in this kind of really loose map, progressive, liberal.
I mean, I guess what I would say is I think that you will occasionally hear conservatives say things like the family is the fundamental unit of society. And what they generally mean by that is like family is super duper important or like family good. Like that's kind of it's just sort of like this vague uh, statement of like affiliation with that word. But I actually take it seriously in the sense that I would say like the family as opposed to the individual is the fundamental unit of society. Like societies are agglomerations and collections and abstractions of families. And to the extent that states work, they work by sort of riding on the circuits, the psychological circuits of loyalty that exist within families. They encourage people uh, to assume the responsibilities and reciprocities of fictive kinship. And the purpose of my write-up was to sort of illustrate a tension that has always existed, but that gets worse as our technological environment increases the returns to scale. So it's always a tension between people who are very tightly aligned, like a mother and a child, where their interests are very closely bound together. There's power in that. But there's also power in just having like a million people to do what you want, right? And so there's this return to intense alignment, and there's this return to great scale. And those two are in tension, right? Because as you get bigger, you can't possibly know everybody in the tribe. And so how do you stay connected? And I basically, and the path that I drew, it's not actually like monotonic and linear like this, but I was, for the sake of making an illustration, I was drawing out like, here are some of the historic solutions to this problem of scale, ways to get people to expand their circle of kinship beyond literal kinship. Mm-hmm. And so there's like aristocracies where it's like one essentially ethnos, one extended family that increases its scale by having a bunch of subject populations to whom there's this sort of, more or less cynical, more or less sincere expectation that the patron class will have paternal regard, paternal responsibility in exchange for some sort of filial obligation at the bottom. And then feudalism makes that sort of nested and fractal where, if I'm sort of a lesser noble, I have people who have that filial abstracted relationship to me, but I also have this paternal patron above me, and that allows this greater scale as it becomes fractal. And then you've got basically capital and gunpowder empires and the church as communications and transport technology expand, and that's sort of the birth of nationalism, which is like, all right, instead of it being like I'm gonna abstract my filial obligation to my lord or to the king, now it's the fatherland. And but it's still connected to this idea of kinship because it's the land of my fathers. It's where my fathers are buried. And the people there, we have the same fathers. We're sort of still this extended kin group. But then you come to where we currently are, which is propositional nationhood, which is basically, it's like homeopathic medicine. Like the notion of kinship has been abstracted away until it includes everything, excludes nothing, means nothing, right? Because if you're sort of every category is defined by what it excludes. Every tribe is defined by what it excludes, and liberal democracies essentially exclude nothing. And so,
not only do they, well, just to add a little grist to the mill, they don't just not exclude nothing, right? Like democracy, it actively, in our era, it actively praises the outgroup. It actively seeks that which is outer to pull into the center.
Right. The fuel is the tearing down of hierarchies and categories because the for lack of external enemies, the state's purpose is now to protect us from each other. And so the state is constantly looking for a hierarchy, a power differential that it can position itself as the sort of champion of the weaker party, whether that's, women in marriage or racial minorities, or now it's children, right? It's on both sides, right? Like it's sort of the right wing flavor of it is like, Epstein and grooming gangs, and you're abusing children, and we're gonna stop you from abusing children. And on the left wing side, it's like trans kids. And obviously, I'm not saying those are morally equivalent, but I'm saying everybody, the logic of power is to look for a weaker party to sort of be the champion of. And that is a way of increasing your own power, increasing the ambit of your own
legitimacy.
Responsibility. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so yes, we've gone from states riding on these psychological circuits of kinship to eating those psychological circuits of kinship, tearing down relationships, tearing down hierarchies. And we're sort of coming to the end state of that, where the basics of what a state is supposed to do, it can no longer do. Mm-hmm. It can't get people to raise families. It can't get people to fight wars, and it can't get people to save, invest, basically, to put wealth back into the system, to defer gratification, right? Because if you're in this environment where it's sort of all against all, then if you don't spend it, somebody else will. The incentive is to just eat the seed corn.
Yeah. So it's oddly enough, it's a Hobbesian, but mitigated by, like the war of all against all is within the state. It's now within civilization. Yeah. It's been recreated within civilization.
Right. These are anti-nations. They're actively recreating the conditions of barbarism to expand their own power.
Yeah.
And where I would sort of part company from like the IDW guys is that they're like, it's all about the individual. The individual is the smallest minority. And it's like that narrative is exactly what allows the state to assert absolute power. Because yes, the individual is the smallest minority. And so it's the weakest of weak parties. And so the state can present itself as that champion and tear down all other hierarchies. We shouldn't care about race. We shouldn't care about religion. We shouldn't care about gender. We shouldn't care about, ethnicity or national identity, like all the protected categories, right? It's all in the name of this sort of sacred individual. And it's I would argue essentially a cheat. It's a way to get people to surrender all of the power that they possess. I mean, the linkage between that radical individualism and like you'll own nothing and you'll be happy is like crystal clear to me.
Yeah.
Like those are absolutely linked concepts. That's why that happens.
It's inevitable. You're saying it's inevitable. Right. Like that. This is the hard thing for a lot of people to grok. Well, primarily me. How the liberal assumptions lead to complete tyranny of the state. And I really apologize for any feminists who still tune in to my channel, but it's a good example. Feminism wants to protect women. And so it starts to tear down structures that oppress women, and it starts to erect structures that protect women that end up then controlling women, because it's rendering the vulnerability of the individual female as the responsibility of this code, this ethical law code, this neutral institution that in fact is just now serving vulnerability. And you see this very directly,
which ultimately is just a bunch of men with guns. Like that's who protects all those women.
It's not even just it's not just men with guns. It's men with guns that call themselves women. so that they can, because and I saw this a couple years ago, and it still exists in Seattle. Just for a brief aside, I went to a feminist event, kind of turfy, trans exclusionary, radical feminist event, and they had tremendous amounts of very vocal opposition by the TRAs, the trans rights activists. And the state was on the side of the trans rights activists. And I went to the trans rights activist event, and they were talking about how vulnerable they were and how much they needed support and how much these feminists hated them and they needed to stand up and put these feminists down. And then I went over to the feminist event, and the feminists were like, "We are so vulnerable. We are the real vulnerable ones, and we need more power. We need more support." And yet, the feminists are the ones who won last decade. They already won. They had all the seats in Seattle Council. They had a feminist mayor, right? But the system needs to find the most vulnerable group to support, because that's where the political capital or energy at least is. And if you look at it blankly, the trans rights activists are more pathetic because they're mentally ill, homeless people who have severed limbs and are addicted to, exogenous hormones at this point, right? So if you follow the feminist logic, then actually they are the not least vulnerable group.
Well, right, and then it's like, well, do you parse that in terms of like socioeconomic vulnerability, or do you parse it in terms of like vulnerability in a dark alleyway? Because like those are radically different. Like the math is totally different. Oh, I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think think if it's a 5'2" lady and it's Charlotte Clymer in the same alleyway, I like Charlotte's odds. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think and that's ultimately like that's sort of one of the fuel sources of the turf thing is like, I don't want to be in a bathroom with this guy. Yeah. I don't want to be alone with this guy. It's very scary physically, personally.
And that's justifiable. I'm not arguing against that.
Right. But yes, it's the way that power is accrued under this system is by presenting yourself as the most pathetic, the most vulnerable, and appealing to state power as mediated through, essentially mass media to make the biggest noise about how you're the most vulnerable and whoever wins. I mean, it's sort of become cliche, but like that's sort of the root of the Olympics of suffering, the oppression Olympics, right?
Yeah,
it's power game.
Yeah, well, but it's a female typical, and by that I mean just like, typically females use passive aggressive techniques to get power because they
wait
don't
till
have
your father gets home.
Loaded. Yeah. Or reputation destruction, social media, PR campaigns against people that they don't like and stuff like that. But you also see the erosion on the other side. If you want to correct that, just on a media level, our society is now allergic to authority and very scared of strength, right? And that it's really interesting how that. I don't think not everything's a psyop from my point of view. I think things just kind of naturally follow from certain assumptions. But you see a lot of this subversion that was really cool. There's a movie my wife is demanding that I take her to called Wicked. And I haven't seen it, and I haven't read the book. But I remember when it came out, it made a big splash. And what it is basically an inversion of this fairy tale where this evil witch is now actually misunderstood. Right. And so it's the subversion of and you've seen tons and tons of heroes being kind of knocked off their paces, especially males. Males in our immediate environment are subservient. They're always the bumbling idiot. A white male you'll never see a white male and a white female happily married in a commercial. Maybe that's changing now, but usually it's a black male and a white female. But so I just wonder, and you see rumbles of this in the classical liberal attack on the dissident right, because they are inherently unable to square the authoritarian circle. They don't know what to do with authority, They don't know what to do with strength other than to be wary of it. And it seems like they don't know how to lead and they don't know how to follow. And so how do you re-erect or resurrect leadership, authority, and power in a media environment that will basically has coded that as genocidal?
Yeah. So I actually, and this is, I think it has a lot to do with the alpha wolf experiments. You've heard about how those were debunked, the model of the alpha wolf and the beta wolf and all the like everything, like all the terminology from game about alphas and betas. It's all predicated on some really sloppy research in the 1950s. And I think it was a Swiss or an Austrian zoo. It was a zoo, and they were monitoring like 30 or 40 wolves in this like little enclosure in a zoo, and the wolves are not related to one another. And so what happens is this brutal working out of a hierarchy through violence.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
That's where everybody's model of like the alpha wolf, beta wolf comes from, is this like completely artificial, completely unnatural, completely fake notion. And then they went and
of
studied
nature
wolves in the
trying to
wild.
correct itself under the conditions of being screwed around with.
Right. And then they went and looked at wolves in the wild, and you know how they work? It's just families. It's just Papa Wolf, and when the young adolescent wolf gets a little too aggressive or a little too cocky, he goes off and does his own thing. Like it's just this very normal, exactly as you'd imagine it, like totally intuitive way for sort of a social mammal to operate.
Yeah.
And basically, I think that in our insistence on looking at the individual as the sort of fundamental unit of analysis, we have constructed a situation where we think all hierarchies are like the wolves in the zoo. All hierarchies are these oppressive, violent, it's raw power. And there's but then you look at like even I wrote about this a long time ago in a post about sort of gender relations. But like even the Greeks, who are like super macho, super misogynistic, super patriarchal, one of the situations where women had like the least like formal rights. Who's the king of the gods married to? Well, he's married to this like total battle axe that he's always arguing with, and they go back and forth and they're tricking each other and they're it's not.
I like how you use the word battle axe. Like that's
she
very...
is like she's very strong-willed. She's constantly like getting in his business and interfering with his plans and outsmarting him, and like it's all if there's any love in a relationship, it's a negotiation. And I think I think this would be much easier to understand if more people had kids. Because like this is a little person who's like totally your inferior intellectually, physically, like you can pick them up and throw them if you want to. Like legally they have very few rights with respect to like not doing what you say. Like on every axis you could conceive of, they are sort of disprivileged, disadvantaged relative to their parents. And yet, if you have kids, what, like everything's a negotiation. Everything, like there's power struggles all the time. And it's because you actually like love them and want what's best for them. And so like you don't actually just get your way all the time. And that's like how human beings are supposed to interact and operate. It's not that hierarchy's evil. It's not that power's evil. It's not that authority's evil. It's that we're not supposed to work out those power hierarchies in this like totally anarchic, totally unrelated, totally detached situation. We're supposed to be families. We're supposed to have these common bonds, these common interests that bind us together, that bind the strong to the weak, and that make them that drive them toward common goals. And so like it's sort of it sort of feels weird to have to say this, right? But like all hierarchies are not oppressive. And and what you have to do to reclaim that intuition is you just have to spend some time around husbands and wives and parents and kids. Like it's this literal like, I hate the way this phrase has been used, but like it's this literal like touch grass thing. Like just go be around normal humans and normal human behavior, and you can disabuse yourself of this really diseased idea that's all about the individual and that all power is corrupt.
Hmm. But there is a need for individual rights, individual expression.
Well, I guess what do you mean?
You well, this is the liberal sticking point, and I'm a liberal, even though I'm always dissing on my kind. This the
Yeah,
soup that I grew up in, and I think most of us are, even like the hardest of the DRs, like we are. Like you just have to go back, to.
sure.
There's a date and time, It might not be the 1990s, but it's certainly probably no further back than the 1930s. I don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
some
yeah.
people are actually feudal, like really, truly feudal.
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
I don't want a central authority who I'm not connected to at all, who has tremendous amounts of power to control me, to say what I can
Hmm.
and cannot say, to tell
Hmm.
me what I cannot, who I can and cannot associate with.
Hmm.
And so embedded in those documents that our founding fathers penned
Hmm.
anonymously, or at least worked on anonymously until they were of substantial clout to put their actual
To
John
go face.
Hancock's, yeah, go face, freedom of speech, these propositions,
Hmm.
right? And those
Yeah.
propositions can't support. It's this feedback loop where people are saying, these propositions are absolutely essential for our freedom, and they're absolutely essential for our growth and for our connectivity and for our freedom and our
Hmm.
prosperity. But
Sure.
then you look at the documents, and the guys are like, well, these things are great, but they're only going to be sufficient to people who are already moral. They're only sufficient to people who are basically already Christian. And you don't have to, you can be
Hmm.
a deist, and you can start to play around with language,
Hmm.
our founding fathers were already trying to like disabuse themselves of godly authority, at least that which
Yeah.
was embedded and encoded in the Christian doctrines.
Hmm.
But those propositions start to erode that which enables them to be maintained. But you can't have, but that which enables Christianity to turn into a free society is based on a personal, individual commitment to these
Well,
truths.
yeah, and that's kind of why I asked you what do you mean? Because I think that there is a very important distinction between saying, um, as a matter of morality, as a matter of aesthetics, as a matter of the kind of world I'd like to live in, um, people should have freedom of expression, they should have freedom of movement, freedom of association, all of these things. It is a separate question to say who is the judge, who is the arbiter, who makes those decisions. Because in fact, the tyranny that we live under now, in which the state controls virtually everything, that was built brick by brick by the state intervening on behalf of these individual rights in all these other hierarchies and saying, husband, you're not allowed to do that to your wife, or you're not allowed to control her in that way, or you're not allowed to control your kids that way, or your employees that way, or your chattels that way, right? Like you're not allowed to do that. It's I get to decide.
Mm.
And that's a separate question from saying, should people be free? The question is not, should people be free? The question is, who is the guarantor of their freedom? Who's in charge? Who decides? And that's a much trickier question because then you're sort of in the libertarian realm where it's like, why would I trust you to be the arbiter of rights? And like with my kids, like, do I want the state deciding what's right for my kids. Now, here's the thing, like if you want to talk about abuse and like tyranny, if you wanted to write a book about like parenting is oppressive, parenting is tyrannical,
Hmm.
I mean, I could help you fill that book. I mean, it's just the level of things people get away with because they're parents is obscene.
Hmm.
It's insane, right? And yet, and yet, for me to say, like, well, parenting should be abolished. Nobody should have any rights to decide what's done with their kids. I'm like, no, no, those are my kids. It's my responsibility. And I actually, like, I don't care how bad anyone else is at being a dad. I still get to be a dad. And that's the that is one of the things that I think these like liberal individual rights proponents are not really thinking about as carefully as they should. It's not exactly about what the rights are, it's about who decides.
Hmm. And how do you curtail the power of the deciders at this point?
Well, I mean, sort of what's happening is that it's eating its own tail, right? It's imploding. Um,
Hmm.
the national debt is going to equal the total value of all U.S. equities by 2035. That's essentially the entire economy being eaten by government debt. Um, that's
Hmm.
totally unsustainable. Nobody's having kids. That's totally unsustainable. Well, no Americans are having kids. Foreigners are having kids in America. Um, no one's having kids in Europe. No one's having kids in Japan. Uh, it is very obvious to me, although it hasn't been uh, concretely proven out, that Western governments can't get anyone to fight their wars for them anymore. And you saw this with the you saw this with the Houthi blockade. You're still seeing it with the Houthi blockade. The 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 commander of that carrier strike group that's parked off the coast of Yemen right now. He was like, when the crisis first opened up, he was posting these videos of like, here's my Zoomer sailors getting their Starbucks at the carrier strike group, and it's a normal day and it's business as usual. We're totally in control of the situation, but they're parked like completely out of range of the drone situation. They're not clearing the blockade. They're just sitting there, and the sea lane is closed. And that's like the purpose of the U.S. Navy, and that's like the justification for the global empire is we will keep the sea lanes open. Everybody can trade. Don't worry about it. Just let us sort of let us run the seas and let us run the dollar, and we'll leave you to your devices. Everybody's rounding the Horn of Africa right now because the U.S. Navy cannot clear that blockade. And
Cannot, will not.
um, well, are those different questions? I'm not sure they are. I think there is, you can say, could that carrier strike group sustain the casualties necessary to clear that blockade? In one sense, yes, maybe. In one sense, maybe not. In the sense of in terms of the political fallout, in terms of the sort of recruiting fallout, which is already this really because like if the recruiting numbers continue to fail, like some of America's adversaries are going to get bolder and they're going to do things. Like there's these
Yeah.
knock-on effects, there's these domino effects, and you can tell, you can see that the armed forces are in this position of like paralysis, stasis, because they know if they move anything, if anything bad happens, like they're going to drop a plate. Something's gonna give. And that I think is very much rooted in the fact that like they have spent at least the last 70 years tearing down all justifications for loyalty to the American state, all the terms on which we might feel some emotional connection to
Hmm.
our nation, well, to the government of our nation, right? Some sense in which we as a people are linked in our destiny to the American state. They've just been burning that down, and it's so like I don't see it as like we have to resist that power actively. I see that as we need to be prepared for what happens when that power collapses. Um, because I mean, if you think the recruiting crisis is bad now, it's like, well, what? Imagine if they're trying to pay people in like funny money that's hyperinflating.
Hmm.
Like, like you'd have, I mean, just like in Russia, you'd have people like, quartermasters just like selling stuff out of the warehouse and defecting and like hiring out their guys as mercenaries and just like a complete diffusion of the power of the state.
Yeah.
And they tried to kind of control that and funnel that. They failed, which is sort of what the Chinese observed about liberalization, which is why they didn't do it. And yeah, so anyway, it's basically I see our task as a people will emerge. I mean, lots of peoples will emerge in the aftermath of this collapse.
Yeah.
And so I view my job as to make sure that like my kids are surrounded by the most excellent, admirable, dynamic people they possibly can be,
Yeah.
so that when that people is formed, it's a really strong and admirable people.
Yeah. Could you go back just a bit and explain? You dropped in China deciding not to liberalize.
Hmm.
What path did China take? Could you reconstruct that briefly?
Well,
Or
essentially, they just didn't do. Uh, uh, Perestroika was the economic liberalization. They didn't do glasnost. They didn't do openness. They didn't do political freedom. They did Tiananmen. And they said, yeah, you can own businesses, but like the Chinese Communist Party is in charge, and they routinely execute CEOs of companies, and they do not play around with sort of the economic engine that they've built. They don't want it in anybody else's hands. They don't allow. It's not to say they don't allow foreign direct investment, but they're careful about foreign direct investment in, and they're very careful about investment going out, which is part of the reason why their real estate markets are so deranged, because they basically, all these sort of Chinese retirees have nowhere to put their money except, these subdivisions and cities no one's ever going to live in.
hmm
And
hmm
so I'm not holding up the Chinese as an example. I'm just saying they saw the chaos of the Russian
Yeah.
collapse and they said, we're not doing that.
So I guess on the eve of collapse, who knows how far away? Do you have a guess? You say 2035,
Well, I think
2050.
2035 is just basically the now all of this is like has an asterisk by it, which is like unless there's a coup. Unless someone takes actual human control of the government. But like if the current bureaucratic, distributed, decentralized managerial blob
Yeah.
stays in power, it's like, well, that thing's going to run out of money by 2035. And that depends on like sort of how we we sort of don't know how bond markets work, right? Like we don't know what people's limit is in terms of like I'm not going to buy bonds at like it's sort of things just have to happen and we sort of see how the market responds.
Okay.
Like I was in a business program during COVID and during the massive amounts of spending, and I had this professor of economics who was like pretty prestigious and written papers and was he was a credible source who was like, yeah, I would have guessed that this would have broken things. I would have guessed that this would have generated massive inflation like immediately, and it hasn't, but it probably will eventually. Like something's got to
Mhm.
give. It will eventually. Um, which very much analogous to like The Big Short, where that guy's like, I know this bubble's going to pop. I know this market's fraudulent, but when, who knows? And that's kind of how I feel about the fiscal situation. It's like it's gonna pop. Basically unless Doge assumes like extraordinary extrajudicial like
Yeah.
dictatorial powers, that's where we're headed.
To slash and burn.
Right. Right.
So
And
yeah.
and to survive the consequences of slashing and burning politically, because it's gonna hurt.
politically.
And
Well,
like
yeah.
no democratically accountable government, in my mind, can survive that. Argentina's doing that later in the game. They've had so many decades of just dysfunction and collapse and chaos that like maybe Milei can get away with the pain he's inflicting and still survive an election, but that's going to be like a close thing.
Yeah.
And to do what has to be done in the U.S., it's going to hurt.
Oh, I mean, you have two generations. I don't know how you and your culture define a generation, but you have Gen X and millennials and Zoomers now. We're all like kind of raised with short-term thinking in mind. And we're the harbingers of the population collapse for our groups. To retrain that on a mimetic level is a huge task. And that's why whenever I speak with people in the hard conservative mindset, and why I bring up feminism, you guys got to contend with, 70, 100 years of feminism, 100 years of like women can do whatever they want, and that motherhood is a burden, and there is even, from playful to painful kind of idea in these DR communities, distant right communities, about the woman question, right? Like, how do you speak to women? And then women show up to these things, very intelligent, not unattractive women show up in these things,
Sure.
get lifted to the top of them, and then are torn down by a bunch of misogynists. And not that you can control speech or control people exercising their right to be complete jerk-offs on the internet, but there's still a case that needs to be made for women to reintegrate, because they are the crux of the matter, at least on the population level.
Yeah.
And then if, I guess a good thing to ask you would be like reconstructing the economy out of the family unit. If you can convince people to start to have families, like where does the economy go from there? And how is that even economically viable?
I think that we are in an interesting position technologically where the stuff that's coming out now, the exciting new tech, for the first time in like maybe 400 years, doesn't increase the returns to scale. It actually privileges small, fast-moving, high trust, high morale groups of people.
Okay.
And that's essentially what's happening with. Go ahead.
No, just define that term. Returns to scale. Like this seems to be the
so
ideology.
Knighthood was predicated on a particular set of military technologies that required people to like have a lot of money for the horse and the armor, and to spend a lot of time training in the martial skills, like spend a lifetime training in the martial skills. Only a certain number of people could do that. Society could only afford so many knights, right? Which creates a certain like optimum social size of like, how many knights can you produce, and how are those knights integrated with each other, and what kind of power dynamics do they share? That's sort of where feudalism, like the fact that feudalism is very much connected to the military technology of like the stirrup and the lance and the horse and all that.
And it's Dunbar number friendly.
Yeah, you could put it that way, and it trees up, right? From it's the king's Dunbar number, and then his courtier's Dunbar number, and it's all the way down.
Yeah.
And then you got gunpowder, which was like what you really wanted to do was just have as many peasants as possible manufacturing replaceable parts for rifles, and as many peasants as possible holding those rifles. Like that's what you wanted, and that's Napoleon, right? Total
And the
mobilization.
Nation.
And the nation. Yeah. Right. And then you had like
the nation, actually, if you look at the linguistic knock-on effects of that. Like the nations at that period of history started to eradicate and
Right.
consolidate language.
Right.
Like
You're
there
not
was a state
Neapolitan, you're
language.
Italian. You're
Yeah.
not Burgundian, you're French.
Well, yeah,
Right.
but the just the tiny little clades and tribes. Well, they weren't kind
Right.
of they weren't tribes any because they. But the languages were just completely homogenized and then
Right.
formalized on these national boundaries, and that's and
Right.
you're right. Like there's Italian language, then there's a French language, and the French language was really centralized.
Right. And yeah, and to some extent, that's a consequence of leaders making choices, but it's also a consequence of a technological environment. And uh, so then like in sort of the 20th century, skipping ahead a bit, but like 20th century, it's like tanks and aircraft carriers and planes, and it's all this stuff that
Radio.
like you need to have radio. You have to so the tanks and the planes and the aircraft carriers, like you need this massive industrial economy to compete. And then radio and TV is like you can have this massive alignment. You can get everybody on the same page, reading from the same book in a way you couldn't before. And so I don't think it's an accident that like basically the 20th century was the first time in history that humanity was essentially divided between two massive poles. Everybody on one side and everybody on the essentially, obviously it's non-aligned, but like
Yeah, yeah,
basically the Soviet Union and the United States carved up the planet. And so now number one, like that situation just was unsustainable. But now the technological environment is changing, and like again, you're seeing it with the Houthis, like a $10,000 submarine drone, a $25,000 submarine drone is totally a credible threat to a $2 billion aircraft carrier. And so the Houthis, they have all the problems that like insurgent groups have in terms of like they have to be really careful what they say on an electronic device, and they have to be really careful about just what they have on. They have to be really careful being
yeah,
out in the open.
yeah.
But like they're finding solutions to that, and part of the solution is decentralization and high trust. It's being able to and the technology demands that, but it also facilitates it. There's a great book. I did a whole podcast on this book, Out of the Mountains, by David Kilcullen. He's one of the biggest counterinsurgency experts in the world, actually. And he wrote this book about how extremism, non-state armed groups are sort of concentrating in the urban littoral, meaning urban places accessible from the sea, for all kinds of technological reasons. But one of the most important is that when you've got a global empire with satellites and drone overwatch, it actually hiding in a cave in the mountains where you're like the only heat signature and you're the only electromagnetic signature. And if you go anywhere, your car is like the only thing moving on the picture. Like that's a really exposed place to be in a way that it used to be really safe. Like bugging out used to be the safe thing to do. And now it's like you want to go hide in the crowd and the EM noise and the economic, back and forth of a huge city. Like if you the Taliban could get hit by like a cruise missile, but like Hamas, if they're like on the fourth floor of an apartment building, it's like way more complicated to get at them. And so then you're sort of fighting like man to man in a hallway, which is the advantage is to the smaller party, or at least the advantage to the larger party is substantially
Yeah.
diminished.
Yeah.
And so that I think is what you're seeing with crypto. That's what you're seeing with increasingly AI allowing sort of enterprise level compute to be in the hands of smaller groups. You're seeing it with drones where like your ability to project force for like 500 you could project force the way that like you used to take $50,000 for like $500. And there's a debate about like whether or not the Chinese are going to have the advantage because they can manufacture all the drones. But like anyway,
Yeah.
it's substantially more complicated than like the argument over like whether a fighter jet advantages big industrial incumbents,
Yeah.
right?
There's that quote, I think it was about a year ago. The guy who was called the president, Joseph Biden. I don't know if he actually was or not, but they called him that. He said something about, oh, you want your guns, so how is that going to go against our fighter jets? But everything you're talking about, I'm like, there's probably going to be this slice of land, probably in Idaho. I don't know. Well, I'm plucking that out. I was just going to say, no, we've had enough and good luck. And it's going to be not only a political difficulty, but actually a logistical difficulty for the United States government to really stop secession. Once that technology, if you just speed up people taking responsibility, making local connections, and then, finding the will and also the public erosion of support for the hegemony of the United States government to, secede.
Right.
But then whenever I ran that simulation, and I'm not like really good at this stuff, but you think about the United States splitting up, like what are we going to do with the military equipment? How's California going to have parts of the military and Texas have parts in the military? How is that all going
The
to
nukes.
Yeah, and the nukes. How are we going to split the nukes? What are we going to do with the nukes? I mean, we are wed, like this. The carapace of empire is still strong enough and heavy enough to force us to relate to one another as a unit.
Yeah.
Is it not?
Yeah. Yeah. Of course it is. I mean, I think we're going to be in the same situation as the Russians, where they will no longer be able to pay the security forces. And so those security forces are going to get paid some kind of way,
Yeah.
you know? And there's a couple ways that can happen. None of them are real pretty. None of them are real clean. Um, and will that actually manifest as secession? I mean, in Russia, you could argue that essentially you didn't have formal secession. You just had all these little gangster fiefs where, they didn't stop calling themselves Russian. They didn't fly a different flag. It was just like, Vladimir's the big guy around here. And if you want to get something done, it's got to go through Vladimir, right? And those fiefs eventually, I mean, part of Putin's sort of success story was just like whacking and jailing and bribing and buying off all those oligarchs until they actually got in line behind him. But I mean, it was essentially a task of recapitulating the power of the state in his hands. It was not given to him when he took power. He had to go get those oligarchs and bring them into line. And so yeah, like I think there's a kind of autism about conversations about secession, that it's like it must be formal and it must we're all going to have our own declarations of independence and our own constitutions and our own flags.
You're not it doesn't seem like you believe in propositions in this environment, or necessarily practical.
I just don't think, and it's like there's like, do I believe in it as like a should? Well, maybe, but I definitely don't believe that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't think that's how it'll look, because I mean, if for no other reason, then we're like just such a profoundly cynical and ironic people now. Like people just aren't gonna, charge under a different flag. Like that's not how this works anymore.
Yeah.
So, I don't think, I think there's I did a write-up a couple of months ago called Quiet Quitting the Union. And it was in the aftermath of Abbott telling the federales to pound sand on the border situation.
Yeah.
And it's like, you don't have to fire on Fort Sumter, right? You can just say, I'm not doing that. Feel free to sue the state.
Yeah.
Feel like let's go to town, let's go to law, let's go to court on it, and that I think will happen more and more. I think it's going to start happening aggressively under Trump. It's going to be blue states
Hmm.
being like, go to hell, not doing that. Sorry.
Do you welcome that?
Um, it's just it is what it is, right? That's just what's going to happen. And so you got to respond to it. I mean, I think
Huh.
honestly, like my preferred outcome is for the American state to return to unitary human control as quickly as possible and as bloodlessly as possible. Because I think that uh, all of the other alternative possibilities are horrifying to contemplate.
Unitary
Uh,
human control. Is there a word that is a single word, like monarchy? Is that what you're saying?
well, so yes, basically, but not because I mean, like I'm not necessarily totally sold on Yarvin's whole thing, but
Well, he's
like,
very autistic. Speaking of autism,
well, but like human,
with his
like
techno bro. Yeah.
it's more about the end of the lack of accountability and the lack of essentially
Yeah.
what we are currently governed by is a sort of distributed non-human intelligence. Like this bureaucracy, it's like when Putin was talking about NATO expansion into Eastern Europe. He was like, "There's nobody to negotiate with on the other side. There's nobody who has authority to like write something down on paper that the American state will respect. Not the president, not the Secretary of State. There's nobody. It's not a person. And like and our whole the way we think about government intuitively implies that there's somebody you can hold responsible, and you just can't with this. And so I guess the reason I don't just say monarchy and a king is because like I can theoretically imagine other arrangements that aren't that involve human, and when I say unitary, I mean the contiguous borders of the United States, like
Hmm.
the whole American state under human control, not necessarily under one guy, although it wouldn't hurt my feelings if it was one guy.
Yeah. 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 I just interviewed Lior Sapir. He's a professor, has a doctorate in law. He's not a lawyer, but he studied constitutional government, and he works a lot in the gender issue around. And there's a lot of legal stuff going on with the gender issue. Tennessee's being sued by the Biden Department of Justice over banning childhood transition. But which is, there's all that political stuff, but when you look at it, you see like how the state actually operates through a set of propositional like formalities through the law. Like, and when you get into trying to change what the state is, and I think Yarvin's done some write-ups about Doge and saying, you're going to try to like reform NASA. NASA's a bunch of policies. There's no person there. It's a bunch of policies. It's a bunch of procedures. That's all it is.
Right.
This stuff has massive amounts of power. And the way that it defines human beings is so just, it's crazy. Like it's all this it's this game that's been being played since the founding of our nation. The founders of our nations were lawyers. Almost every single one were lawyers, and they created this thing because of the modality of its creation was the law. And so when we theorize about human beings taking power or reforming this thing or turning it back into a human controlled mechanism, that which it is doesn't have a grip on what humans are. Like when just defining a child or defining a woman, it can't define a woman. It can't even define a human. Like it doesn't have the apparatus to do that. It has all these cases and all this discussion going on around these abstract ideas. When I look at that stuff and like really try to understand it and then realize that is the power, like that is the source of all the power. and it's so inhuman that you could probably, when I try to run the simulation, I'm like, I think the only thing that's going to solve this is some sort of human commandeered AI to clean up the whole thing. Like, it's so deep. Like, the conversation is so, no one person can actually understand. You have to have a whole team,
Yeah.
and then you have to have all these squabbles. So when Trump comes into office, or when Biden comes into office, and they make all these declarations and stuff, that, or even when maybe Obama actually could have been a hero, but once he got installed, he became the form. Like, the man became an extrusion of the form of the machine. Like, it
Yes.
turns people into the machine.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, could he have been? I think he was a product of that machine kind of from the beginning. But like
Yeah.
a man in that position with that level of sort of buy-in, yeah, maybe could have done something revolutionary. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think essentially what falls to Trump is like the sort of good news in my mind is he has to go to war with that state personally. Like,
Uh, well, it's thrown bullets at him. I mean, you can't
yeah,
prove it,
if
but
he
it
doesn't want to
hasn't
die
stopped
or land in
bullets.
jail or have his kids land in jail, he's got to go to war with that system. So like, if anybody is properly incentivized to go to war with that system, I would say it's probably him.
Hmm.
Um, and part of the problem with so if you're like sort of a great man theorist, is you just sort of sit around and watch and hope that the great man will do what he's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Um,
This is kind of like a cousin of the nothing ever happens theory of
yeah,
politics.
yeah. And I guess what I would say is like for me, my focus is on uh number one, like what does Trump winning and Trump as sort of the at least rhetorical revolution that's taken place, the vibe shift.
Yeah.
What opportunities does that afford us to be more powerful as families and as a tribe?
Yeah.
But then also like what are the volatilities? What are the risks? What should we be looking out for if it doesn't go the way that it's supposed to go? And how can we be prepared for that?
Hmm.
Um, and so like I sort of see it as like yes, I actually do believe I'm not totally a systems guy. I think individual people make choices that make a big difference on sort of the flow of history. But as somebody who's like trying to raise a family and trying to build something of my own, um, I kind of can't afford to push all my chips into one of those outcomes because precisely because I believe it's like his choice and it's this sort of spiritual like
Mm.
it's up to him, will he, won't he kind of a thing. So I have to
Yeah.
sort of hedge against, prepare for both eventualities.
Well, so when you were talking about exit, what came to mind is kind of weaving the needle between gaining leverage. Like, you brought up the dichotomy, either exit or have voice. And
Hmm.
if everybody's like, don't let the door slam your ass on the way out, then your voice doesn't really matter to begin with. So you want
Right.
to get leverage, but you want to do it in such a way that you don't become a target, right?
Hmm.
So you have to kind
Right.
of weave this thing. I wonder if what your thought. I mean, you got doxxed at some point.
Mhm.
I don't know to what degree you were in danger, but I'm sure you had some sort of cost to it, reputational.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could have gotten another corporate job, um, which is a blessing. But we had weird people calling us on the phone, and had a situation where people were kind of walking by the house, and that was a little disturbing. We didn't know what that was about. But I mean, uh, nothing serious. And I guess for me, it was primarily just like ordinary people should be able to speak. Like currently the situation, or at least back then, it's better now. But back then in 2021, the people who like had freedom of speech were, people who said what the system wanted said. and people who were independently wealthy and people with nothing to lose. So like you got Haywood, who's got his like shampoo empire, and so he can say what he wants.
Yeah.
Um, you got the neat in the basement who can say the N-word to his heart's content, and that's another type of guy. And I'm a big fan of the neats. I think they had an important role to play in sort of cracking things open because nobody else could speak. Um,
Hmm. Yeah.
but long run, you don't want that to be the only people who are propounding big ideas. And and then I sort of noticed though that like it wasn't strictly about money, it wasn't strictly about class. It kind of had to do with control of the capital that you use to earn a living. So like take for instance, I had guys I knew who like ran a window tinting business out of their garage. And those guys would just Fed post all day long on Facebook with their face, with their name, like, and it's not because, oh, they're hillbillies, they're stupid. It's because they it wasn't going to hurt them. They could get away with it. Like the state had no levers on them. And then also guys who like, there's a guy who's like a COBOL programmer. And like if you're an old guy who knows how to program COBOL, like there are all sorts of institutions that like you're one of a dozen guys in the country and they need you so bad. It's probably not a dozen literally, but it's small.
Yeah.
And like they need you so bad. And so like these guys, like yeah, they were just W-2 employed. They were sort of subject to the hostile work environment provisions of discrimination law technically. But like they could wear a shirt with anime boobs on it. They could get away with it because they were the only COBOL program. Just like it was de facto sovereignty, de facto power.
Huh.
And so we sort of got to work thinking about like what are the skills we could give our guys? What are the sort of professional positions we could put them in? Some of which are entrepreneurial, but some of which are not, that allow them to exercise that kind of sovereignty and importantly for like that victory to lead to further victories, to open up new vistas of sovereignty and power. And so that's kind of what we're doing. It's yes about entrepreneurship, but it's also about getting more sort of essential marketable skills. It's also about just having professional connections. Another type of guy who is sort of de facto sovereign, surprisingly, is certain kinds of salespeople. Because if you're dependent on sort of a corporate lead spigot, right? Then you kind of have to do what the man says. But if you're like a relationship manager for your little book, your little fief of people who you sell to for the company, and if you go, they go, you're in a totally different leverage position with respect to your employer. And
Hmm.
so it's like it's not, you don't everybody doesn't have to be a plumber, everybody doesn't have to be a coder, every like it's not one answer.
Yeah.
It's just thinking through like how can your skills make you more sovereign? And so we have these accountability calls and we have these meetups and we're sort of getting together to talk about that and
Yeah.
uh and build that capacity.
That's interesting. So there is kind of a sovereignty that is individualistic in practice, practically.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's
In the market, you're for kind of a capitalist open market. You don't want a centralized market, like, but a
uh I'm
centralized.
I'm for my guys having more control. Like
Huh.
you ever read Albion Seed?
I don't think so. No.
So it's a great book. It's kind of in the right wing canon of books to read. It's basically talking about the four folk ways that founded America. And so you've got the Puritans and the Quakers and the Border Reivers and the Cavaliers, and they all have very different cultures and they sort of
Hmm.
ally or conflict in various ways. But one of the most interesting passages in that book is the section on the Cavalier notion of freedom. So the Border Reivers, their notion of freedom is like, get off my lawn. I'm going to shoot at the mailman. I'm going to shoot at the census man. Like That's their freedom, is like, you can't tell me what to do.
Yeah.
The Quaker idea of freedom, of liberty, is sort of every normie's conception of liberty. It's like, I'll respect you if you respect me. Let's all be nice to the nice. Let's all get along. That's like the world's notion of freedom, is essentially the Quaker notion of freedom. The Puritan and Cavalier versions are very different. The Puritan version is basically like, we as Puritans decide what goes on around here. And so, like, yeah, we're going to tell you how long your dresses can be, and we're going to tell you that you can't masturbate, and we're going to tell you that like, all, like, they would literally get together and like have a town council about, like, this
Mores.
guy's
Yeah.
doing such and such, and we need to stop him from doing that. It was about the freedom, the sovereignty of the
Sounds
tribe.
like an HOA. Like,
Right. No, exactly. It's exactly what it is. Like HOA on steroids. That's their, like, when they would say freedom, like we talk about sort of the pilgrims coming to America for religious freedom. And it's like their notion of freedom was, we decide what happens around here.
mm-hmm.
And if you hear their story of like how they got there and what they went through to get there, like, I'm totally sympathetic. Like, yeah, like you make the rules there. Because they fought hard for that place. And then the Cavalier notion of freedom was essentially like, a man is free if he is the king in his domain. So like, his freedom is not reciprocal. It depends on the subordination of his his domain, his family, his property. Like, he's the master of that domain. And so, like, when people talk about like conservatives or right wingers having hypocritical notions of freedom, they're generally talking about one of those two things. They're talking about either like, yeah, I want the freedom for my tribe to decide what the rules are, or I want to be the boss. And I am much more sympathetic to those notions of liberty. I don't think that like there's no place for reciprocal, give and take individual freedom, but that's certainly not the only notion of freedom that I think is compelling.
It's
Like,
weird because it just seems like a domain issue. Like there's the market, and then there is how you dress in public, and then there's how you treat your classmates. Like there's all these different ways where those liberties are appropriate, and there's ways in which those liberties are inappropriate.
so the way that I would maybe harmonize or eliminate the apparent contradiction is, I would say, I do not see a real difference between freedom and power. If you are free, then you have power, or you have permission. Like if you have freedom, quote unquote, but you don't have power, what you really have is permission. You have somebody who has told you you're allowed to do that. And and I think, and again, this goes back to like, who decides, right? Is a society where somebody on, like, the classic example, the nude beach, right? Is a society where like, I can beat somebody up on the beach for exposing themselves to my kid. Is that more or less free than a society where I am required by law to let that guy do that? Like, to me, that answer is not obvious. And freedom, in a lot of cases, is a function of what you want to do. And so and I think a lot of this, like, sort of when they talk about like the woke right and all that stuff, and a lot of it is the same kind of genealogy, the same DNA as the IDW kind of sphere. I think that allergy to power is because they see power as at odds with freedom. And it's like, no, I am a very like temperamentally libertarian guy. I want to be in power because I trust me to leave everybody alone.
Yeah.
I don't trust anybody else to leave everybody alone. That's why I want to be in charge. I did a write up on George Bailey and how for Christmas how It's a Wonderful Life is a
Hmm.
struggle for personal power. It's a struggle for the right to decide the exception. George Bailey wants to be the guy who gets to decide who gets a break on their rate or who gets an extra couple months to make a payment or who gets eviction, proceedings against them. Like that's he wants to be in charge. And all the people, they defend his sovereignty for him because his sovereignty is their sovereignty.
Hmm.
The fact that he's in charge is the reason that they're free. It's not that like they figured out this maximally egalitarian, maximally libertarian. Pottersville's libertarian. Like it's full of strippers and vagrants, not because any human agency like loves strippers and vagrants, because it's just that's how like weeds grow in a garden box. It's entropy. It just shows up when nobody cares, when nobody's in charge.
Hmm.
And Potter doesn't want to be in charge of Bedford Falls. He just wants to consume it, just wants to eat it. And so I think it's really important for good guys, decent guys, freedom-loving guys to realize that it's okay to want power. It's not only okay, it's a duty. Like you need to be in charge because if not you, then either somebody worse or nobody is going to be in charge. And like those are both really undesirable outcomes.
Yeah. And the propositional nation at scale is insufficient to that. But on the other end of
It's
that,
not even real. It's like nobody actually believes in that.
yeah. Well,
I mean,
I
like,
don't know. I can't figure out the argument for it. I mean, I understand it, but in practice, I keep on watching some really brilliant minds just make this completely inhuman argument. Like that if we just abstract our trust into this thing that's not God but has God flavor and isn't nationalism but has national flavor but is patriotism and has all these ideas. The truth is in the ideas, and we don't need a nation of people. We don't need a nation of land. And I'm like, well, where are the
right,
people in the land gonna live in these
right,
ideas? Like,
right. There's no.
and then there's a slippage to the ethnos. That's where I see the weirdness.
Well, nobody takes it seriously fundamentally. I mean, when I say there's no civic nationalists, what I mean is like nobody is actually insisting on the acculturation and indoctrination of new Americans or even the children of existing Americans. Like nobody's saying you actually must believe this to be an American.
Hmm.
Nobody's like, if you're like an Antifa commie burning flags, none of these civic nationalists are saying like we should revoke your franchise. You shouldn't get to vote because you don't believe in the American ideal. And it's like if they would say that, then I would take them more seriously. I would go,
Oh,
okay, you're a
okay.
sincere civic nationalist. You actually believe in that. But they don't. Like
There,
there's no interest in enforcing any of it. It exists
there.
strictly to deny the existence of nationhood. That's all it's for.
They're addicted to argument and allergic to power. It seems like.
That's a good way to put it. That's exactly right. Uh,
But what, from your point of view, the thing that the woke right, which is such a stupid term, it's a stupid term, but also it's a political tool to cast aspersions on people in a wide variety of with a wide variety of points of view and lump them
yeah.
all together. And it's a total Motte and Bailey. By the originators of the term use it as a Motte and Bailey, and they'll call some people woke right, and then they'll revoke the term completely arbitrarily in order to advance their things. And you basically the
Sure.
only thing that the only thing that's consistent with the term woke right is people who have criticism of Israel, or at least have criticisms of our propping up of Israel as a nation. And
Yeah.
then, and then you have the whole anti-Semitic thing. So there is a respect for the ethnos of Jews and Israelis. There's
Right.
absolutely a respect for that ethnos and that
Right.
state's decision to protect its people, its land, its culture, its language, its laws.
Right.
But when it comes to European whites and white Americans, any sort of ethnic solidarity is anathema. And I understand why that is. I have an allergy to that, to vocalizing that. But like I have a natural. If I look at my life, if I look at the women that I am attracted to, right? If you look at the people that I just naturally associate with and naturally have trust with, it generally tends to be white Americans and some black Americans who are basically the same ethnos as me, just a different race.
I
You know?
think what it comes down to is just the rejection of boundaries as such.
What do you mean?
Well, I think they're okay with other people having boundaries. They don't want to impose boundaries. And if they were serious about the boundaries of civic nationalism, they would enforce them. But really, civic nationalism is just a tool to deny the existence of ethnic boundaries. And when you think about what it would take to enforce, and you see this with Jews actually. You can like, what is that? Two Jews, three opinions. They can believe
Yeah.
all kinds of things. They can have all kinds of arguments. It can be knocked down, drag out. There's this real richness of debate because at the end of the day, you're still in the tribe. You're a Jew no matter what. You can't get away from it. You're a Jew, and if you insist on a tribe that is something that exists inside people's minds and their hearts, it's like, well, then we got to like go rooting around inside them to make sure that they believe all the right propositions in the right
Yeah.
order and the right priority. And it's like, that's actually way more invasive than like a cheek swab to say, are you in or out of the tribe?
Yeah.
Right. And, but the cheek swab is too invasive too. Because it's not that they have a problem with a particular kind of boundaries. They just have a problem with boundaries. They don't think there should be any boundary because they can always think of exceptions. They can always think of, well, this person's really cool, or this person's really, and I like this person. And so they should be in the family too. And I think that's a big part of it is like, we have to figure out how to have friends who are not our people and say like, yeah, like we have a lot in common. We can collaborate. We can have, friendships. We can get along. But like, I actually have a people that's my people. And I don't think white nationalism is coherent. I don't think it's just that you don't get to decide that a cooperative equilibrium exists with your co-ethnics when there isn't one. Like they're sort of trying to like drum up this like sense of common feeling, and I just don't think it's working. I don't think people have like all of our most important enemies as Americans are pretty much all other white Americans. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not to say that there's anything like specially bad about those people, just that like trying to draw the boundaries that way is not coherent. But in terms of like, is America more heterogeneous ethnically, or is it more heterogeneous ideologically? Like if you had to say tomorrow or next week, like, all right, all the fake Americans, we're putting them on the boats and they're getting out of here. Like, which of those tasks would be the harder job? Like circumscribing all the homogeneous real Americans by ethnos, or all the homogeneous real Americans by ideology? I think the ethnic one would be substantially easier, larger, more straightforward to do. But it's always framed in these terms of like, oh, that's unrealistic, that's preposterous. Like they're both preposterous.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're both like, you can't draw the boundaries in a way that makes sense anymore because the conditions that created America no longer exist.
Yeah.
The conditions of the front, like basically, I mean, the Comanches decided who was American. Like if you were going to get shot by the Comanche, you counted. Like, and you had to circle the wagons. And like, I'm obviously being sort of loose and metaphorical there, but like the conditions of the frontier established the American people, and those conditions no longer exist. And so we're all sort of trying to like big brain about like, how do we stay Americans? And it's like, maybe you don't.
Maybe you don't. Maybe, yeah. Well, then what is there then? There's just people. I mean, you have
Yeah.
the American flag, and then you have
Yes.
exit. Like, this is your
Yes.
branding. There's some contradictions or tensions in that juxtaposition.
There's tensions. There's tensions for sure. I basically, you know, I hold on to the flag because it's mine, and
What did
I'm
you
not
do
going to
to
let
deserve
anybody
it,
take it
or
from
to
me.
earn it, or to belong it to it,
Oh,
or to
it's
you?
just mine. There's no question of deserve. It's just mine. Um, if you talk about like,
Huh.
I talked about this with respect to Elon too. Like if you start talking about like who deserves what of their inheritance, it's like Elon would totally get it if you told him like, yeah, there shouldn't be 100% estate tax because people are actually entitled to pass on their wealth. Well, a nation is a patrimony. A culture is a patrimony. We have a right to inherit it because our forefathers had a right to pass it down. That's part of their it's part of respecting their rights. And so uh yeah, so deserve's got nothing to do with it. It's just mine. I'm an American. And so essentially, but I mean in terms of political divisions, right? That's what we're talking about. It's like how do you become a people again? And that I think the answer to that is it's going to be defined by the conflicts in the future. It's going to be,
Which are defined
um,
or is circumscribed by the technologies of the present.
mhm, mhm. But on a human level, it's I expect to be in big trouble in like a couple of ways in the next like 10 years. Like existential big trouble. And I'm going to find out who my people are. And you're going to find out who your people are because you're going to be in big trouble too. We're all going to be in big trouble. And those peoples well, and this goes back to the idea of family as the fundamental unit. Um, the way you unite two families is by marriage. That's archetypal. That's as deep as literature. It's as old as literature. And the way that you can define your people is who are you contracting those alliances with? Who are you going to share grandkids with? What kind of grandkids are you going to have?
Hmm.
And so yeah, the answer to that question of like
So
who are
Exit is
your people?
basically
That's going
just
to
like a
be
generation level dating app then? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, kind of. I guess you could put it that way. No, but it is. It's about surrounding your kids and your tribe with the best other people you can find, the most,
Hmm.
the most admirable, the most decent, the most, reliable, and trying to build something together. It is a project of human cultivation. It's about what kind of people do we want to be.
Hmm.
Um, and so yeah, it's very much about like what are we going to build together, and it's not like everybody in there is not going to be the new people, right? Uh, and there's even sort of endogamy questions like I'm a Latter-day Saint. I expect my kids to marry Latter-day Saints. I got a lot of Catholics in the group. I expect them to marry Catholics. So there will be um, people are going to find their tribe, right? And the
Hmm.
tribe is going to sort of be revealed rather than it
Yeah.
being this like autistic, like what are the bullet
Yeah.
points that define who we are?
Yeah. I guess that's when I say I'm a liberal, I'm wrestling with what I mean by that, and it's kind of like a vibe. Like I can't really put my finger on it, but it does have to do with my uh, not my well, yeah, my difficulty with boundaries, but my ease of transcending them, my ease of like just projecting myself out of them, my ease of like transitioning between boundaries, being an open, having like an open character, and then also a willingness for things to shake out on their own. But that liberalism on that freedom level is more rooted in my experience of a higher authority, like my experience and therefore my belief in God is like, well, God is much greater than any man, so it's gonna work out. But with that is like, but then there's gonna be consequences, and there is gonna be bad things that
Sure.
happen. There's gonna be things that are gonna shake out. But I am
Yeah.
I can't not call myself a liberal. And and even like with the whole ethnic question or the racial question, I don't really care, but I know and I'm wary of certain, like, I was walking around, I think it was Germany. It was either Germany or France, and I turned a corner, and there was just a bunch of Somalians or a bunch of black people from Africa, and they were all concentrated in this area, and I knew that was their area. A less racially charged one. I was in Chicago. I wanted a cup of coffee. I went into a place and it was Serbian, and I knew that I didn't belong there. They gave me my coffee, but I could feel like I don't belong here. This is not my group, or like, and I understand that boundary. I respect the boundaries, but I'm a little bit more on the looser side with mine up to a point.
Sure.
Like, I'm a little bit more broad up to a point because my boundaries can scale as long as the values and other people are fitting into that.
Yeah, I mean, ethnicity is game theoretic. Like, if you show up at the prison cafeteria, you don't get to decide to be like post-racial. Like, that's not up to you. Like, you're in a racial environment. Like, that's just how it is. And that's not, you don't have to take a moral stance on it. You don't have to, or you can choose to, but like, it's irrelevant to the reality.
Yeah.
And I think
there's that Key and Peele sketch. I don't know if you've seen it, where Key, who's bald, he thinks he's a skinhead, and he doesn't realize, like, the whole joke is like him trying to be friends with the skinheads because he's parsing the tribe.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, that's and I think and to the extent that the sort of ethnocentric, the white nationalist thing, what they're trying to do is basically like post enough pictures or videos of like white kids
of a blonde
getting beat
woman
up on the
in a
school
field.
bus.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm talking like the criminal stuff, like white kids getting beat up on the school bus or something.
Yeah.
And they're counting on this like game theoretic understanding to emerge that says,
which is
I may
prison
not
level.
care.
Yeah.
Right. I may not care about being white, but a lot of people care that I'm white. And I think that is having an impact on the discourse, but it will not make a people. Like, it doesn't. People
but the
don't
Comanches,
gel like
the
that.
Comanches do, but not the Twitter, TikTok.
The difference is is it you? Is it actually you? And what are you? What do you? How immediate? How existential is it? Like, there's definitely a point where maybe the UK is getting here, where the problem is so vast and so serious that like people start to think of themselves as English again.
I don't know. But they're so deeply liberal that I think that they don't have the antibodies. I mean, like Carl Benjamin, who's he says he's post-liberal, but he's super duper liberal, and like he's trying to take a stance. He's probably like, and then Tony Robinson, like in solitary confinement for being right. Like, I don't know if they're able to stand, and it's going to be terrible if they do. It's going to be absolutely terrible if they do. Like, we're talking violence.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I think the role of American empire has to be incorporated there. I don't want to say, America's the protagonist of the whole planet, and that's like, it's what we say matters. But like, I think if the UK were a politically independent entity, change would have already taken place. I think that a lot of things are being held in place by the State Department, by the intelligence services. Like, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's very sort of satisfying to like post George Washington memes and be like, sort of triumphalist about the fact that we're not British.
But they're our brothers.
Yeah, and they're hurting, man. They're really going through it, and so. Yeah, I think we have to recognize sort of that they're in a different situation than we are, and they have fewer tools than we have, and
Yeah,
I mean,
they
if I
can
would,
carry knives, I think, but probably just butter knives at this point. Speaking
yeah,
of
well, yeah,
tools.
it's like it's really bad. Um, and I don't know what I would do. I don't know what I mean. I would like my best guess at what I would do is I would try to get out of the UK.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't know what you do about that.
Yeah.
So anyway,
So, Kevin, your blog, exitgroup.us, is that where people can find your excellent write-ups, I
yeah.
have to say?
Oh,
Great
thanks.
writing, very
Thank you.
precise. Is that the
Yeah.
seat of
So
your internet?
Twitter, extra dead JCB,
Yeah.
and then yeah, blog.exitgroup.us. That's the place to find me.
Yeah. What are people going to find when they get there?
Well, so my Twitter account is just me running my mouth. So, you can just
Isn't
decide.
it? Well, so is mine, for the
Yeah,
record.
you just decide how much you like or don't like that. But then Exit Group is the website for the fraternity, and the write-ups are basically, some thoughts about the day's news, but then also some
Yeah.
announcements from the group about things we're building and like meetups we're going to have.
Yeah.
And if you're a paid Substack subscriber, you can come to the cocktail hours. You get an invite to every time we run a cocktail hour. We should do them all over the country. So.
Yeah. What's your favorite cocktail?
Yeah, I don't actually do that.
Yeah. That was a trick
So
question.
I have made some mistakes. I made the mistake of scheduling one of these cocktail hours at the rooftop bar of the Watergate, which because I don't drink, I had no idea. It's like $40 old fashions and stuff. So like the
Oh
guys were
no.
kind of mad at me about that. But we figured it out. But yeah, anyway, it's a good time. We always have a good time
Yeah.
with the guys.
Yeah. What kind of non-internet hobby do you? I guess you have kids, so it's probably like something with
Yeah,
kids. But what do you
yeah.
really enjoy doing outside of
Um,
the internet stuff?
I dabble with the guitar. Um, I go to the gym with my wife,
Oh, couples
which is
gyms.
which is yeah, it's one of these like CrossFitty type places.
Getting sweaty with
Um,
Betty.
yeah. And yeah, that pretty much takes up the time. I'm running a lot of things lately, so I haven't had a ton of free
Yeah.
time. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's kind of the big
Yeah.
stuff.
I really enjoyed our conversation. I hope we can have another conversation because there's so many different ways to go.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's good to
But
talk.
what's the barrier to entry for Exit Group? Is it like a height requirement? Is it like an XY chromosome thing? Like,
So yeah, you sign up, you pay your first month's dues, and then we have an intake interview.
okay.
And that's basically just a vibe check. And, how hard would it be for me to explain to the guys why you're here?
Okay.
Um,
So it's kind of like a
so
social club, but it's a professional kind of
I mean, I would say it's primarily
training.
professional. It's about
Yeah.
what we're
Okay.
building. It's about doing things together.
Yeah.
But obviously it has a social component.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how it works. You schedule
It's
the intake
interesting.
call, and then we make a decision, and we get you through.
I guess from your point of view as an LDS member, yeah, you believe fundamentally in a pluralistic society on some level. So you're not
I
like
mean,
well, I guess the localized theocracy, or I mean, you're okay getting along with you don't want a religious war, right? I mean, so
well, yeah, I mean, as a practical
no.
matter, we'd lose, right?
So if you
I
had
mean,
enough power, then you would win. So you'd be
well,
okay with it.
no, I'm kidding, but I think pluralism has to be contextualized in
Huh.
terms of some basic. I mean, that's what Madison meant when he said that it's only sufficient for a moral and a religious people. It's like, you can have religious freedom, but you can't have religious freedom if like 50% of the population is Aztecs rolling skulls down the pyramid. Like
Yeah.
that's not what would that mean in
Yeah.
that context? Um,
Yeah, I think people have a
so
problem understanding that there's a bandwidth. It's a bandwidth issue. Like there's certain
right,
frequencies of wavelengths of light that are acceptable. Like that's the
right.
purpose of the Overton window. It's like this is acceptable.
Yeah, and when you
This
try to make
allows
it
for it.
like it's about the words themselves or it's
Yeah,
about the paper itself,
yeah,
then basically just the person in charge is whoever interprets that document.
Yeah.
and
That's where
there's
we're
no
at.
rule of law. There's just rule by lawyers. That's all
Yeah.
there is.
That's what it is.
So, when you say, do I support pluralism? It's like, yeah, who do you mean? You know,
Huh.
who are we
Yeah.
talking about?
Yeah. Well, Kevin, you're a nuanced fella. Congratulations on 10, or no, not 10, 6.
10 would be impressive.
But I'm sure you guys
Six,
are aiming for the
six
10.
so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. It was great to meet you. Insofar as this is in person, I'll link to your work down in the description. Do you have anything else to plug for me?
That's it, man. Oh, NatalCon, natalism.org. We're having the
Oh,
natal
not
conference
NatCon, NatalCon. Okay. That's what.
NatalCon. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Natalism.org. And it's March 28th and 29th in Austin, Texas. We're going to be getting together to discuss birth rates and what we can do about it. Both, a lot of the argument is sort of centered around like, can we do anything about it globally?
Yeah.
And I actually find that like a less interesting question than like, can you do something about it for your family?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm attacking.
Are the Collinses going to be there? Are you guys on?
Yeah.
Yeah. And connection. That's interesting.
Absolutely.
Well, and that's in March. That's really interesting. Maybe I'll try to make it. And are there going to be like breeding championships or anything like that?
I had some of the tech people be like, it's super weird. This is the only conference I've been to this year that didn't have an orgy room.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Pardon me. I'm sure he was half joking, but only half joking.
Oh, yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe.
Geez, no polycules there, I'm sure.
No polycules.
That doesn't scale. Oh, well, maybe. Maybe it does.
It doesn't
Maybe it
scale.
doesn't.
It doesn't
I don't
scale.
know.
Well, I'll say I didn't witness or endorse any polycules
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
Who knows? Who knows? But yeah, no, it was a wonderful time last year. It was basically really, really smart people coming together to discuss a problem that we are all profoundly humbled by.
Mm-hmm.
Which that's such an incredible environment to be in when like you don't have people kind of swinging their dicks around and talking about like, I have all the answers, because we don't have all the answers. We don't know what's driving this or what to do about it necessarily. And so the conversation was very rich. It was very nuanced and took us in some interesting directions. So yeah, we're gonna do it again this March in Austin.
And did you guys compile all those discussions on the website? Because that'd be interesting to get through.
Yeah. If you go to the YouTube channel,
okay,
which I
Excellent.
can link to you, it's got all of our speeches. And as a matter of fact, Elon posted my opening speech for the conference back in April. And so that was kind of a catalyst for a bunch of new academics getting on board because they saw the speech and were like, it looks cool. So it's gonna be more mainstream academics, more people who can like put numbers to things. Yeah. Which I think is gonna really enrich the conversation. So.
Oh wow. Amazing. That's so great to find yourself in the middle of these nexuses of,
Yeah, it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Great. Kevin, really enjoyed you. I'm in the recording. Hope you have a good 2025, I guess.
Yes, sir. You too. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Cool, man. Thank you so much. The recording's over.